General Hospital will reveal when Jason made the fateful decision to claim paternity of the child Sasha was carrying. He believed he was doing the right thing, for Michael, for Sasha, and for the family he had sworn to protect with his life. But what he failed to anticipate was how deeply that choice would ripple through the lives of those closest to him. For years, Jason had been the cornerstone of loyalty and integrity in the Corinthos family. His unwavering devotion to Sonny and Carly had never been questioned. They trusted his instincts, respected his moral compass, and believed that no matter how dark the world around them became, Jason would always walk the line between protector and brother with clarity. That belief had weathered the most harrowing betrayals, the bloodiest feuds, and the most painful sacrifices. But now, all of that trust teetered on the edge of destruction. Not because Jason had turned against them, but because his loyalty had turned inward, blinding him to the danger in the very person he thought he was saving. Jason's decision was rooted in a kind of sacrificial love, the kind that made him step in as a shield while Michael was recovering in Germany, vulnerable and disconnected from the chaos unfolding in Port Charles. He thought that by stepping into the role of father to Sasha's unborn child, he could prevent unnecessary scrutiny, legal entanglements, and media frenzy from further destroying Michael's chances of regaining custody of Wiley and Amelia. It was, in Jason's mind, a temporary deception, a noble one. But Sasha was not the woman he thought she was. Behind her tears and pleas for protection was a labyrinth of secrets Jason had no way of detecting. Unknown to him, Sasha had been meeting in secret with a mysterious man, a man whose identity remained obscured but whose intentions seemed far from innocent. These encounters occurred while Michael was out of the picture, leaving Jason to act on instinct rather than knowledge, and what he didn't know would soon prove to be his greatest vulnerability. Sasha wasn't just evading public judgment, she was evading justice itself. There were whispers, now growing louder, that she was actively working with legal operatives who had ties to Rick Lansing, the same man determined to dismantle Michael's world through the courtroom. Sasha's sudden disappearances, her strange reluctance to cooperate fully, and the subtle manipulations she employed to keep Jason emotionally tethered all pointed to a web of deceit that was slowly tightening around him. While Jason thought he was protecting two people, he was, in reality, the pawn being moved across a chessboard whose design he had never seen. Sasha was not a victim, she was a strategist, one who knew exactly how to play on Jason's sense of duty and his history of shouldering burdens that weren't his to bear. Carly, ever perceptive, began to feel the unease long before the truth came to light. Her first suspicions were sparked by leaked hospital surveillance footage showing Sasha leaving with an unknown man shortly after a scheduled OB/GYN appointment. The grainy images circulated quickly, stirring questions among those already skeptical of Sasha's claims. For Carly, it wasn't just about the footage, it was about Jason. The man who had always been her pillar of honesty, who had stood by her through betrayals, heartbreaks, and even her darkest choices, had withheld something that struck at the heart of her identity as a grandmother and a mother. The idea that Jason had known about Michael's child and chosen to keep it from her felt like a fracture in the foundation of their bond. Her pain wasn't just personal, it was generational. Carly had spent a lifetime fighting for her family, for her children, and for the legacy that had kept the Corinthos name a symbol of strength in Port Charles. Now, it seemed that legacy was being threatened not by enemies outside, but by secrets within. Jason's silence echoed the same patterns of betrayal she had once endured from others, only this time, it came from the man she trusted most. Sonny, meanwhile, was entangled in an even more complex emotional battle. In the twilight of his time in the criminal underworld, he had sought redemption, peace, and a life less stained by blood and manipulation. He had counted on Jason to walk beside him through that transformation. For Sonny, Jason was not just an enforcer or a friend, he was his conscience, the steady hand that pulled him back from the brink when rage threatened to consume him. Discovering that Jason had concealed the existence of his grandchild ignited a fury Sonny had tried for years to suppress. It wasn't just the lie, it was the implication that Jason believed Sonny couldn't be trusted with the truth. That assumption, whether conscious or not, wounded Sonny more deeply than any rival's betrayal ever had. The brotherhood between them had endured wars, deaths, and impossible moral compromises, but this felt like a severing of something sacred. Sonny saw not just the risk to the custody case, but the possibility that the lies could unravel everything they had built, both legally and emotionally. Amelia and Wiley were not just children, they were the heart of what Sonny had left, the continuation of a legacy he hoped would rise above the shadows he had cast in his youth. The cracks widened as Rick's legal strategies began to shift, seemingly empowered by an inside understanding of Sasha's vulnerabilities. Carly could no longer deny that Sasha had been compromised, and with that realization came a tidal wave of dread. Jason's cover story was starting to collapse, and Carly feared that it would not only jeopardize Michael's position in the courtroom, but also expose them to a far more dangerous truth, one that could rip their family apart from the inside. Sonny's rage became quiet and cold, a dangerous silence that replaced the explosive outbursts of his past. He didn't need to yell to make Jason feel the weight of his disappointment. The distance between them was punishment enough. And yet, Jason remained torn. The man who had once walked into gunfire without blinking now found himself paralyzed by guilt and uncertainty. He wanted to make things right, but every step he took seemed to dig him deeper into the pit Sasha had helped create. Michael, unaware of the full extent of Sasha's duplicity, still defended Jason publicly, but even he began to waver as more inconsistencies surfaced. Sasha had disappeared, leaving behind more questions than answers, and now Jason had to deal with the fallout alone. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, one in which his noblest instincts had been manipulated into acts of betrayal. Jason didn't just risk losing Sonny and Carly, he risked losing himself. And as Rick prepared to deliver the final blow in court, using Jason's deception as a way to challenge Michael's credibility and fatherhood, it became clear that the cost of Jason's sacrifice might not just be trust. It could be everything. The deeper Jason waded into the murky waters of deception and betrayal, the more he found himself disoriented by the very people and principles he had once believed unshakable. What began as a selfless act to protect Michael and ensure his children would not be ripped away from him by an increasingly aggressive legal system had now spiraled into something Jason could no longer control. The shadows lengthened around him, and with every passing day, he became more uncertain of who he could trust and where the true danger lay. His suspicions of Sasha, once fleeting and easily dismissed, grew heavier as concrete evidence began to surface. Evidence that suggested her involvement with Rick went far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Jason's gut twisted when he came across a cache of encrypted messages hidden on Sasha's burner phone, messages that included references to court strategies, medical updates from Michael's stay in Germany, and legal vulnerabilities that only someone close to Michael's inner circle could have known. The most damning revelation, however, came when Jason discovered that several of the messages had been forwarded to an anonymous legal contact. It wasn't long before Jason, using the digital trails Sasha had foolishly left behind, traced the recipient to a man once disbarred for ethical violations, none other than a former associate of Rick Lansing. The implications were staggering. Sasha had not merely lied to protect herself. She had actively conspired with Rick's camp, potentially feeding them every vital detail they needed to destroy Michael's credibility as a father and flip the custody case in Willow and Drew's favor. For Jason, the realization was nothing short of soul-crushing. In trying to protect Michael, he had inadvertently armed Michael's enemies with everything they needed to win. His identity as the baby's father, a lie told with the intention of shielding Sasha, had now become a legal and moral liability so immense that Jason could barely fathom the consequences. His role had shifted from protector to pawn, a disposable tool used by someone he thought he was saving. Now, Sasha was nowhere to be found, her disappearance as calculated as her betrayal. Jason could feel the trap closing in around him, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't know how to fight his way out of it. Sonny's reaction, though not entirely unexpected, was still devastating. The moment he learned of Jason's deception and the emerging possibility that it had empowered Rick's assault on Michael's character, he severed ties with Jason completely. There were no confrontations, no angry tirades. Just an icy silence and a quiet, unequivocal message sent through intermediaries that Jason was no longer welcome in Sonny's life. To Sonny, this wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a betrayal of blood. For decades, they had stood side by side, through loss, war, and countless sacrifices. But now, in Sonny's eyes, Jason had chosen someone else over family, and that was a sin too great to forgive. Still, deep inside, Sonny struggled. The fury and heartbreak warred within him, pulling him between the brotherhood he had once deemed eternal and the stark truth that perhaps that brotherhood had been buried under too many lies. Carly, caught between her aching loyalty to Jason and her maternal instinct to protect Michael and the children, found herself in a moral quagmire of her own. She had always trusted Jason implicitly, relied on his judgment even when everyone else had failed her. But this betrayal, this concealment of something so critical, was more than a misstep, it was a devastating blow to everything they had built together. And yet, as she reviewed the mounting evidence against Sasha and the increasingly aggressive moves from Drew and Willow's legal team, Carly couldn't help but consider whether she should weaponize Jason's lie to shift momentum in court. It was a ruthless thought, but these were ruthless times. If she exposed Jason's role in the deception, she could paint Sasha as unstable and possibly call Rick's entire strategy into question. It would be a gamble, one that could cost her the last shred of friendship she had with Jason. But it might win Michael his children back. Still, the thought of betraying Jason further sickened her. For all his flaws, she knew his heart had been in the right place. He had acted not out of self-interest, but out of misguided loyalty and a desire to shield Michael from even more pain. But if Sasha had played them all, if she had manipulated Jason into a lie that now threatened to implode everything, then Carly knew she had to act before it was too late. Meanwhile, Jason's world continued to implode. Estranged from Sonny, distrusted by Carly, and left adrift without Michael's full confidence, he began to piece together the final puzzle. He revisited the surveillance footage of Sasha leaving the hospital and, with the help of a private contact, identified the man with her as a former legal aide to Rick, a man who had once been caught doctoring evidence in a custody case. The implications were undeniable. Sasha had not stumbled into Rick's orbit by accident. She had been placed there, or worse, volunteered to be there, as part of a long-term plan to infiltrate Michael's defense and sabotage it from within. The sudden nature of her pregnancy, her insistence that Jason take on the role of father, her emotional breakdowns, all of it, in hindsight, looked like a masterclass in psychological manipulation. The theory that she had deliberately ensnared Jason wasn't just paranoid speculation anymore. It was a horrifying likelihood. And with her now missing, no hospital records, no plane tickets, no phone calls, Jason knew she was likely already gone, leaving him to take the fall. Worse still, Rick's team had begun to circulate whispers that questioned Jason's mental fitness and motives. They painted him as unstable, a man driven by guilt and attachment issues, someone who inserted himself into a custody battle without legal standing. It was a narrative Jason could not easily refute, especially with Sonny and Carly no longer at his side to vouch for his character. As the court date approached, the walls closed in. Jason's sacrifice had not only failed to protect Michael, but had also endangered everything Michael had worked to rebuild. What was once a gesture of love now stood poised to become a legal weapon used to destroy them all. And as Jason stood alone, watching the empire of trust he had built crumble to ash, he knew one thing with agonizing certainty: he had been played. And the person he thought he was saving had been the architect of his downfall all along. Jason had no choice left but to confront the storm he had created head-on, starting with the man he had betrayed the most, Sonny. The silence between them was more brutal than any bullet Jason had ever taken. He stood in Sonny's office, trying to explain the tangled web of motives, intentions, and desperate loyalty that had led him to claim paternity of Sasha's child. But words, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't undo the betrayal. Sonny, a man who had forgiven the unforgivable time and time again in the name of loyalty, now looked at Jason with a coldness that pierced deeper than anger ever could. He couldn't understand how the one man he had always trusted with his life could hide something as monumental as a grandchild. Sonny had always seen Jason as more than an enforcer, he was a brother, his conscience, his anchor. But in that moment, Jason became a stranger. The pain in Sonny's eyes was unbearable, and for the first time in years, Jason felt truly exiled from the only family he had ever known. In the haunting silence that followed their encounter, Jason realized he hadn't just lost Sonny or Carly, he had lost himself, consumed by a misguided loyalty that had unraveled every foundation he thought unbreakable. Even Michael, the very person Jason had set out to protect, stood shaken by the consequences. Though he appreciated the sacrifice, Michael couldn't ignore that the lie Jason told was now a threat to everything he had tried to reclaim since returning from Germany, his children, his credibility, and his fragile stability. As Sasha vanished from Port Charles like a ghost in the night, leaving behind only confusion and suspicion, Jason was left standing amid the wreckage. No one knew where she had gone or what else she might be hiding, and her silence spoke volumes. Jason was now forced into a crossroads where both paths led through pain. He could run, vanish like she did, and spare himself the wrath of public and private condemnation. Or he could stay, shoulder the blame, and walk through the fire alone. But Jason Morgan was never a man to flee, not when the cost of his mistakes would fall on the people he loved. So he stood still, prepared to face the consequences with the same stoicism that once made him a legend. What he didn't know, however, was that every step he took was being monitored. In the shadows, Rick was watching, waiting. Armed with knowledge of Jason's fabricated paternity and Sasha's quiet betrayal, Rick saw a rare opportunity. He wasn't just interested in winning a court case, he was crafting a narrative, one in which Jason's lie would not only destroy Michael's custody claim but could permanently taint the Corinthos family's legal standing. Every email Jason had sent, every move he had made under the guise of protecting Michael, was being collected, twisted, and turned into legal ammunition. And Jason, who had once been Port Charles's silent guardian, now stood unknowingly at the heart of its next great reckoning. In a city like Port Charles, where truth and lies often dance together in indistinguishable rhythm, Jason's misstep had become a fault line beneath the lives of everyone he cared about. What began as a lie told out of love had now metastasized into a weapon of destruction, not only of trust but of legacy. The line between hero and villain had blurred beyond recognition, and Jason found himself suffocating in the gray. Every attempt to explain, to salvage, to rebuild, only deepened the chasm. He was no longer the unshakable protector, the stoic figure others could lean on. Now, he was a cautionary tale. A man whose silence was used against him, whose loyalty had been weaponized, and whose greatest strength had become his most tragic weakness. As Rick prepared to strike with legal fury and Sonny withdrew further into himself, Jason stood alone in the eye of the storm, no longer certain if he was saving anyone at all, or simply delaying the collapse of everything he once stood for.